Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the Bingel book and audio series. My name's Matt Bingel. It's been quite some time since we have done this, so I thought today we would do a little something different than our usual stories. Today I'm going to read you 3 stories from Daddy's Bedtime Bird Stories, written by Mary Graham Bonner. This is an older book. It was first published in 1917 by Mary Graham Bonner, with a few illustrations here and there. It's not much, but I think these will be stories that you'll really enjoy. Oh, and for those wondering, no, this has nothing to do with our feathered friends at Bird Call. Just wanted to make that clear. Let's start off with our first story today. Our first story today is entitled, Old Mr. Owl Writes a Book. Old Mr. Owl wanted to write a book, and he asked the fairies how to set about doing it, commenced Daddy. "Well," said the Fairy Queen, "it makes a good deal of difference, old Mr. Owl, what you want to write about." "What nonsense," he said. "It's just that I want to know how to start off with my book. Just think what a marvelous book it will be. For as long as folks can remember, I have been called the wise bird, the bird who's awake at night and for whose eyes are so very bright. Before I started saying what a fine book it would be if I were you, I'd write it and give other people the chance to say so," said the Fairy Queen. Mr. Owl began to write with his pen, made out of one of Mr. Turkey Gobbler's best feathers, on a large flat stone, which he put in the hollow of his tree. Very late in the night, he awakened the fairies who had been sleeping, and told them to listen to his book. Then he called all the owls from the neighborhood with a loud hoot, hoot. But before he began to read, he said, "I've not enough light. I will hurt my eyes, my beautiful, wise, big eyes." You see, he had made a special arrangement to have his own lights, and when he said he hadn't enough, from all over came countless little fireflies. They sparkled and gave the most beautiful light all over the woods, and Mr. Owl put on his spectacles on his nose. And said, "Now I see to perfection," which means quite all right. And Mr. Owl commenced reading his book. It told about the parties, balls, and picnics in Fairyland, and of the wild adventures and happenings in the woods. The fairies were absolutely delighted that a book had been written with so much about them in it. And the Fairy Queen was more than happy, for the last chapter was all about her. "Well," said Mr. Owl, "you made me ashamed of myself for boasting about my book before I had written it, and so the only thing I could do was write a wise chapter all about you." And the Fairy Queen smiled with pleasure, and also with amusement, for Mr. Owl had certainly thought he could write a wise book, though the next time perhaps he wouldn't say so before he had written it. The fireflies had been sparkling and flashing lights all this time. Finally they whispered, "Have a dance, all of you. We'll give you the light and dance too. It is not well to read books all the time. You must dance." So they all ended off with a fine dance, and old Mr. Owl, with his book under his wing, danced with the rest of the owls and fairies. But before the evening was over, he presented to the Fairy Queen a copy of his book, which said on the cover, "A book by wise Mr. Owl." Now we all know that owls are mighty fine, wise owls. They are mighty fine birds indeed. You see, they are what we call nocturnal. What that means is they stay awake during the night, and they sleep during the day. Our next story is entitled The Woodpeckers Start a Bird Band. The woodpecker family were around on various trees drumming on the bark. Mr. Harry Woodpecker, Mr. Downy Woodpecker, and Mr. Red-headed Woodpecker were hard at work. "Let's start a band," suggested Mr. Harry Woodpecker. "What's that you say?" asked Mr. Red-headed Woodpecker, who had been so busy at work that he had not heard what Mr. Harry Woodpecker had been suggesting. "A band," repeated Mr. Harry Woodpecker. "What sort of band?" asked Mr. Red-headed Woodpecker. "In the first place," continued Mr. Harry Woodpecker, "our bills are not only fine tools for the work we have to do, getting the insects in the trees and burrowing for our nests, but they would be splendid to use in beating the drums in a band." "Where would we get the drums?" asked Mr. Red-headed Woodpecker. "The trees, of course, you silly," said Mr. Harry Woodpecker. "Oh, yes," agreed Mr. Red-headed Woodpecker. And Mr. Downy Woodpecker said, Of course. The trees will be our drums." "We'll get the other birds," said Mr. Harry Woodpecker, "to help us. We need something in a band besides the drums. We'll ask the goldfinches, the mockingbirds, the bobolinks, the phoebe and chickadee families, all of the warbler and vireo families, and the robins, of course. Then I think we'll ask the orioles and the whippoorwills, the thrush family, and the song sparrows." "Oh," said Mr. Downy Woodpecker, "that will make a perfect band. We'd better get started right away." And the woodpeckers began to practice. They made such a noise that the birds came from far and near to see what they were doing. Mr. Sapsucker, Mr. Crested Woodpecker, and Mr. Flicker Woodpecker had all joined in beating the drums too. "Why are you making such noise?" asked the birds as they flew around in the nearby trees to talk to the woodpeckers. "Oh," said Mr. Harry Woodpecker, "we were just going to ask you all to join our band. We will beat the drums." "And just what do you want us to do?" asked Mr. Robin Redbreast, who was always eager to help. "You must all sing." "But we all sing differently," chirped the song sparrow. "We know different tunes and different songs." "Oh," said Mr. Harry Woodpecker, "I never thought about that. But never mind. You can have little parts to sing alone, and other choruses where you will all sing together. I'm sure it will be a very fine band after we have practiced." And they began pounding the drums again. "Well," said Mr. Robin Redbreast, "if the bird band isn't to be the finest in the land, at least we'll make a cheerful noise." You see, friends, practice makes perfect. Even if you don't start out great in the beginning, you eventually will. That doesn't just go for a band. It goes for a lot of things. Like my puppeteering, for example. It took me a while to get where I am now, but I honestly think I'm doing very well, and hopefully you think so too. Our last story today is entitled The Cardinal Bird and the Robin. "The cardinal bird," said Daddy, "is a very superior bird, and will not come down to the ground. The lowest he will come is to a bush, but he never hops along the woods or lawns. No, not he." One day, Robin Redbreast was walking along a green lawn. He stopped several times to pick up a worm from the ground, swallow it whole, and then walk along. In a tree nearby, he spied the cardinal bird. "Hello," he said cheerily. "Won't you come and have a worm with me?" "Hello," he said cheerily. "Won't you come and have a worm with me? There are a number in this lawn, and the good rain we had last night has made the ground so nice and soft. Do join me," he ended with a bright chirp. "No, thank you," said the cardinal bird. "I wouldn't soil my feet on that ground. I hate the ground, absolutely hate it." And the cardinal bird looked very haughty and proud. "Come now," said Robin Redbreast. "You won't get your feet dirty, And if you do, he whispered knowingly, I can lead you to the nicest brook, where you can wash them off with fresh rainwater. Do come. I cannot, said the cardinal bird. I do not like the earth. I want to be flying in the air, or sitting on the branches of trees. Sometimes I will perch for a little while on a laurel branch, but come any lower? Dear me, no, I couldn't. It's a great shame, said Robin Redbreast. Of course, there is no accounting for taste. Thank you for inviting me, added the cardinal bird politely, for he prided himself on his good manners. Pretty soon some people came along. At once they noticed the beautiful cardinal bird. He wore his best red suit, which he wears all the time, except in the winter, when he adds gray to his wings. His collar and tie were black, and his feathers stuck up on top of his head, so as to make him look very stylish and fine. Oh, what a wonderful bird, said the people. Mr. Cardinal Bird knew they were admiring him, of course, and so did Robin Redbreast. No one had noticed him, but he didn't care, for he knew Mr. Cardinal Bird was by far the more beautiful, and Robin hasn't a mean disposition. Well, when the Cardinal Bird heard the praise he began to sing, the glorious high voice he had, and he sounded his clear notes over and over again. Then he suddenly stopped, cocked his head on one side as though to say, And what do you think of me now? From down on the ground, Robin Redbreast had been listening. Oh, that was wonderful, wonderful, he trilled. Listen to that dear little robin, said one of the people. I must get him some breadcrumbs. When the breadcrumbs were scattered over the ground, Robin Redbreast invited the cardinal bird down again, thinking they were for him. But the beautiful proud bird would not come down, and the people were saying, After all, there is nothing quite so nice as a dear little robin. Each bird has its unique bird call. All of them have very unique bird calls, which make them their own. And that is the end of our stories for today. If you'd like to have me read more of these stories from Daddy's Bedtime Bird Stories, let me know in the comments, and I will definitely do more. And if there's any story that you'd like for me to do on this page, also let me know in the comments, and I will get to it as soon as possible. For now, I'm Matt Bingel. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you again next time on another Bingel Book and Audio story. Bye now.